The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Highgrove House as Charles sat at his mahogany desk, sorting through the Morning Post. His private secretary had already filtered most of the correspondence, but a few personal letters always made their way directly to him. Among the usual stack of official invitations and charity requests, one envelope caught his eye immediately. It was different from the others. The envelope was made of cream-colored paper, thick and expensive, with no return address. What made Charles pause was the handwriting on the front, in elegant, flowing script. It was addressed simply to Charles, with no title, no His Royal Highness, no formality at all. And in the corner, written in the same delicate hand, were two words that made his heart skip: "My love." Charles felt a familiar flutter in his chest. Could it be from Camilla? They had been exchanging letters for years, even during the most difficult times when discretion was paramount. But something about this envelope seemed different. The handwriting, while beautiful, wasn't quite Camilla's. He knew her penmanship as well as his own, had traced those letters with his fingers countless times. He turned the envelope over in his hands, studying it carefully. The wax seal on the back was unfamiliar, pressed with what appeared to be a small bird, perhaps a nightingale. Camilla had never used such a seal. His curiosity growing, Charles reached for his letter opener, the silver one his grandmother had given him years ago. As he sliced through the seal, a faint scent escaped from within. It wasn't perfume exactly, but something more subtle, like dried flowers or old books. His hands trembled slightly as he withdrew the letter, written on matching cream paper in the same elegant script. "My dearest Charles," it began, and he found himself holding his breath. "I wonder if you will remember me after all these years. Time has a way of softening memories, doesn't it? But some moments remain as clear as crystal, untouched by the passing seasons." Charles frowned, searching his memory. The writing style was refined, educated, but offered no immediate clues to the author's identity. He continued reading, his confusion deepening with each line. "I've thought of writing to you so many times over the decades, but courage always failed me at the last moment. What right did I have to disturb your life, to resurrect what was buried so long ago? But recent events have given me pause, made me realize that time is more precious than pride." The letter spoke of shared moments, but in such veiled terms that Charles couldn't place them. References to "that summer when the roses bloomed early" and "the concert where Mahler made us both weep" danced around specificity. The author seemed to know him intimately, yet remained frustratingly anonymous. Charles set the letter down and walked to the window, gazing out at his beloved gardens. His mind raced through possibilities. University days? His time in the Navy? The countless official functions and private gatherings over the years had brought him into contact with thousands of people. But who would write with such familiarity, such apparent affection, yet remain unnamed? He returned to the letter, reading the final paragraphs with growing intrigue. "I've followed your journey from afar, watched you grow into the man I always knew you could become. Your dedication to your causes, your patience in waiting for your destiny, your devotion to those you love. All of this has only confirmed what I knew in my heart so many years ago." The letter was signed simply with the initial E. Charles sat back in his chair, the letter still in his hands. E. The initial meant nothing to him in this context. He thought of every E he had known: Eleanor, Elizabeth, Emma, Edmund. But none seemed to fit the intimate tone of the letter. The mystery writer spoke of knowing him before he became the public figure he was now, suggesting a connection from his younger years. He picked up his phone, contemplating calling someone. But whom? This was too delicate to share with his staff, too mysterious to burden Camilla with, at least until he knew more. The letter writer had been careful not to reveal anything that could identify them, yet they seemed confident Charles would eventually remember. Throughout the day, the letter haunted him. During his meetings with agricultural representatives, while reviewing architectural plans for his Poundbury development, even during his afternoon tea, his mind kept returning to those cream-colored pages. Who was he? What summer of roses were they remembering? Which Mahler concert had moved them both to tears? That evening, Charles retreated to his study again. He pulled out old photo albums, appointment diaries from decades past, searching for clues. The 1,960 seconds and early 1,970 seconds seemed the most likely time frame. Based on the letter's references to his youth, he found himself studying faces in group photographs, wondering if E was hidden among them. As night fell, Charles made a decision. He would have to investigate this mystery carefully. The letter writer had taken great pains to reach him personally, bypassing the usual channels. They claimed to have known him before he was shaped by duty and protocol, when he was simply Charles. That alone made this worth pursuing. He locked the letter in his private desk drawer, separate from his correspondence with Camilla, separate from all official papers. This was something entirely different, a ghost from his past reaching out across the years. Tomorrow, he would begin his search in earnest. Tonight, he would lie awake, wondering about E, about roses and Mahler, about a love he apparently couldn't remember, but someone else had never forgotten. The mystery had only just begun, and Charles found himself both unsettled and oddly exhilarated by the uncertainty. In a life governed by schedules and expectations, this unexpected letter had introduced something he rarely experienced anymore: genuine surprise. As he prepared for bed, one thought kept circling in his mind. Who was E? And what secret had they kept for so many years? The following morning arrived with a gentle mist hanging over the Gloucestershire countryside. Charles had slept fitfully, his dreams populated by faceless figures and half-remembered conversations. He rose early, skipping his usual morning ride to instead sequester himself in his study with strong coffee and determination. He had developed a plan during the restless night. First, he would review his personal records from the 1,960 seconds and early 1,970 seconds more systematically. Second, he would discreetly inquire with a few trusted friends from that era. The letter's mention of Mahler particularly intrigued him. He had attended numerous classical concerts in his youth, but how many had featured that specific composer? Charles pulled out a leather-bound journal from 1,968, his handwriting younger and less refined than now. As he flipped through the pages, names and events came flooding back. There were the usual suspects: debutante balls, polo matches, official ceremonies, but scattered throughout were more personal entries, moments when he had been allowed to simply be himself. Then he found it. The 15th of June, 1969. Extraordinary evening at the Festival Hall. Mahler's Fifth Symphony. E. Surprisingly moved by the Adagietto. We talked for hours afterward about beauty and impermanence. His heart raced. There it was, E. But frustratingly, he had used only the initial even in his private journal. He searched the surrounding entries for more clues. 2 days before, Mother insists I attend the midsummer garden party. At least E will be there to make it bearable. A week later, E sends the most amusing letters. Such wit, such understanding. Charles set down the journal and rubbed his temples. Why couldn't he remember who E was? This person had clearly been significant to him during that summer of 1,969. Yet their full identity remained locked away in some inaccessible corner of his memory. He moved to his telephone and dialed a number he knew by heart. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. Nicholas? It's Charles. I wonder if I might ask you rather an odd question. Lord Nicholas Soames had been one of his closest friends since childhood, and had an elephant's memory for social details. Of course, sir. How may I help? Do you remember the summer of 1,969? Specifically, anyone in our circle whose name began with E? There was a pause. 1,969. Let me think. There was Lady Elizabeth Cavendish. Of course. And Emma Tennant was around quite a bit that season. Oh, and that charming Estonian count, what was his name? Edward something? None of the names sparked recognition in Charles. He thanked Nicholas and ended the call, more puzzled than before. Perhaps he was approaching this wrong. The letter writer had been careful to remain anonymous while dropping specific clues. Maybe they wanted to be remembered naturally, not hunted down like a fugitive. Charles returned to the letter, reading it for what must have been the 20th time. This time, different phrases stood out. Recent events have given me pause. What recent events? Time is more precious than pride. Was the writer ill? Facing some life change? He spent the afternoon in the garden, ostensibly reviewing plans with his head gardener, but finding his attention constantly wandering. Every bird call made him think of the nightingale seal. Every rose reminded him of that mysterious summer. His staff noticed his distraction but wisely said nothing. That evening, an idea struck him. He called his former valet, Michael Fawcett, who had an uncanny ability to remember every detail of Charles's life. Michael, I need your help with something delicate. In 1969, was there someone significant whose name began with E? Someone who attended concerts with me? Michael's response was immediate. Oh yes, sir. You're thinking of Lady Eloise Ashworth. Brilliant young woman, if I may say so. You were quite taken with her that summer. The name hit Charles like a physical blow. Eloise. Of course. How could he have forgotten Eloise? Memories came rushing back in a torrential flood. Lady Eloise Ashworth, daughter of the Duke of Pemberton, with her quick wit and infectious laugh. She had been different from the other society girls. She actually read the books she talked about, genuinely loved music, and could make him laugh even in the stuffiest of situations. They had met at a garden party, bonding over their mutual dislike of small talk and love of gardening. She had been studying botany at Cambridge, passionate about plant conservation before it became fashionable. He remembered now. The roses. She had written her thesis on heritage rose varieties, and they had spent hours that summer touring gardens, discussing the merits of different cultivars. But what had happened? Why had she vanished from his life so completely that he could forget her? Michael's voice brought him back to the present. She left rather suddenly at the end of that summer. Sir, her father took a diplomatic post in South America, and the whole family relocated. You were quite affected by her departure, if I recall correctly. After ending the call, Charles sat in stunned silence. Eloise Ashworth. The memories were clear now. Her laugh, her passionate discussions about conservation, the way she could quote poetry at the perfect moment. And yes, that night at the festival hall, when Mahler's Adagietto had moved her to silent tears, and they had sat afterward in a small cafe discussing life, death, and the transcendent power of music. But she had left. Her father's appointment to Argentina had been sudden, and she had gone with barely a goodbye. He remembered now the pain of that abrupt departure. The letters that had stopped coming after a few months. The way he had forced himself to move on. It had been a survival mechanism, perhaps, to lock those memories away. Charles retrieved the letter from his desk drawer, reading it with new eyes. Every reference made sense now. The roses weren't just any roses. They were the heritage varieties she had shown him, teaching him to appreciate their subtle differences. The concert wasn't just any concert. It was the night they had both understood, without words, that what they felt went beyond friendship. But why now? After more than 50 years, why had Eloise chosen this moment to reach out? The phrase, recent events, took on new meaning. Charles opened his laptop and began searching. Lady Eloise Ashworth, what had become of her? The search results were sparse but telling. She had become Dr. Eloise Ashworth Miranda, a respected botanist who had spent decades in South America working on plant conservation. She had married an Argentine scientist, Miranda, but had been widowed 5 years ago. And then, the article that made Charles's breath catch, renowned botanist, returns to England after 50 years abroad. The article was dated just 3 months ago. Eloise had returned to England to take up a position at Kew Gardens, bringing her expertise in South American flora to British conservation efforts. The accompanying photograph showed a woman in her 70s, silver-haired and dignified, but with the same intelligent eyes he remembered. Charles stared at the screen, his mind reeling. Eloise was back in England. After half a century, She had returned and reached out to him. But why the mystery? Why not simply announce herself? As he pondered these questions, one thing became clear. He had to see her. Whatever her reasons for the cryptic approach, whatever had prompted her to write after all these years, he needed to know. The boy who had walked with her among the roses was long gone, replaced by a man shaped by duty, disappointment, and determination. But reading her letter had awakened something he thought buried forever. The memory of a summer when anything seemed possible. When love was simple and pure, uncomplicated by the weight of crowns and expectations. Tomorrow, he would find a way to reach Eloise. Tonight, he would remember. Charles spent the next morning crafting his response. He went through dozens of drafts, each one feeling either too formal or too presumptuous. How did one respond to a ghost from the past who had materialized into the present? Finally, he settled on simplicity, writing in his own hand on his personal stationery. "Dear Eloise," he began, "your letter found me, as I suspect you knew it would, at a moment when I needed reminding that life holds surprises still. The boy who walked with you among the roses has grown old, but he remembers now. The gardens, the music, the conversations that shaped him more than he knew." He sealed the letter and faced the challenge of delivery. The original envelope had no return address, but his research had revealed that Dr. Ashworth Miranda was indeed working at Kew Gardens. He could have had the letter delivered through official channels, but something about this exchange demanded personal attention. Instead, he asked his most trusted aide to deliver it by hand to Kew, with instructions to give it only to Dr. Ashworth Miranda herself. 3 days passed before a response arrived. Again in that familiar cream envelope. This time, Charles recognized the handwriting immediately. Wondered how he could have forgotten it. Eloise's second letter was less guarded, though still careful. "Charles," she wrote, "I wasn't certain you would remember, or, if you did, whether you would respond. Time has changed us both. Carved lines on our faces and wisdom in our hearts. I see you've had your aide deliver your letter personally. Ever thoughtful. Even after all these years. I wonder if you would consider a more direct form of communication. The Eden Project is opening a new tropical biome next week, and they've asked me to consult. Perhaps you might find time in your schedule to discuss plant conservation, for old time's sake, if nothing else." Charles smiled at her approach. The Eden Project had long been one of his favorite initiatives, combining his passion for environmental conservation with innovative architecture. Trust Eloise to choose neutral ground that aligned with both their interests. He checked his calendar. He had an investiture ceremony at Windsor that week, 2 charity galas, and a meeting with the Prime Minister. All of them suddenly seemed less important than they had an hour ago. He instructed his secretary to rearrange his schedule. "I'll be visiting the Eden Project next Thursday," he announced, trying to sound casual. Extended visit. Environmental research. If his staff found it odd that he was suddenly taking such personal interest in a project he already knew well, they kept their thoughts to themselves. The day arrived gray and drizzling, typical Cornish weather. Charles traveled with a minimal security detail, insisting on as much privacy as possible. As his car wound through the Cornwall countryside, he found himself uncharacteristically nervous. He had faced presidents and kings, addressed parliaments and hostile crowds, but the thought of seeing Eloise after 50 years made his palms sweat like a schoolboy's. The Eden Project's distinctive biomes rose from the former clay pit like alien spacecraft. Charles had visited many times before. But today, everything seemed different, charged with possibility. His aide led him through the visitor center to a private meeting room overlooking the Mediterranean biome. "Dr. Ashworth Miranda will join you shortly, sir," the aide said, withdrawing discreetly. Charles stood at the window, watching visitors explore the gardens below. He didn't hear the door open behind him, but he sensed her presence before she spoke. "You haven't changed as much as you think," Eloise said softly. He turned slowly, and there she was. The years had transformed the willowy girl into an elegant woman, her once dark hair now silver, her face lined with the evidence of laughter and sun. But her eyes, those intelligent, knowing eyes, were exactly as he remembered. "Eloise," he said, and found he had no other words. She smiled, and suddenly the decades collapsed. "Hello, Charles. Shall we walk?" I believe gardens were always our best conversation spaces. They made their way into the rainforest biome, the humid air wrapping around them like a living thing. For the first few minutes, they spoke of safe things. The plants, the conservation work, the marvel of creating a jungle in Cornwall. But gradually, the real conversation emerged. "Why now?" Charles finally asked, as they paused beside a waterfall. "Why reach out after all this time?" Eloise was quiet for a moment, studying a bright orchid. "My husband died 5 years ago," she said. "Carlos was a good man, a brilliant scientist. We had a partnership based on respect and shared work. But he knew he wasn't my first love. On his deathbed, he made me promise something. He said, 'Eloise, you've given me 30 wonderful years. Now go home and find out if what you left behind was real, or just youth painting memories golden.'" Charles felt his throat tighten. "And was it real, I mean?" She turned to face him fully. "Do you remember what you said to me the night before I left for Argentina? You said that some people are meant to cross our paths to teach us who we are, and others are meant to stay. You said you thought I was the staying kind." The memory hit him with physical force. That awful night, both of them pretending her departure was temporary, that letters would bridge the distance. He had been so young, so certain that love could overcome geography and duty. "I remember," he said quietly. "I was wrong about many things then. I thought I had more freedom than I did. I thought time was infinite. We were both wrong," Eloise said gently. "I thought I could forget. I thought new landscapes and important work would fill the space. And they did, in their way. I had a good life, Charles. Meaningful work, a kind husband, stepchildren, who became my own. But Carlos was right. I needed to know if what I remembered was real." They continued walking, the path winding through tropical plants from around the world. Charles found himself telling her about his life. The struggles, the waiting, the joy he'd found in his work and causes. She told him about her decades in South America. The plants she'd helped save from extinction. The indigenous communities she'd worked with to preserve traditional botanical knowledge. "I'm not here to disrupt your life," Eloise said as they emerged from the biome into the Cornwall drizzle. "I know you have found your happiness with Camilla. I've seen how she supports you, understands you in ways perhaps I never could have. I suppose I just wanted closure? No, that's not right. Connection. To know that what we had existed, that it mattered." Charles stopped walking, taking her hands in his. They were older hands now, marked by age and work, but still graceful. "It mattered," he said firmly. "You mattered. That summer shaped how I understood love. Taught me that it could be intellectual and passionate, funny and profound all at once. Every garden I've created has something of you in it. Every time I've fought for conservation, I've heard your voice arguing passionately about biodiversity." Tears gathered in Eloise's eyes. "I named a plant after you," she confessed. "A new species of orchid we discovered in the cloud forests. Dendrobium princeps. My colleagues thought it was because of the regal purple coloring. But really it was because it bloomed against all odds in the most unlikely places. It reminded me of you, thriving despite the constraints, bringing beauty to difficult ground." They stood there in the gentle rain, two people in their 70s, holding hands like the young lovers they had once been, not with romantic intent now, but with the deep affection of those who had shared something precious and never quite let it go. "I'd like to see it sometime," Charles said. "This orchid you named for me. And I'd like you to see the heritage rose garden at Highgrove. I planted it 20 years ago, but I realize now I was thinking of you when I chose the varieties." Eloise smiled. "I'd like that. Friends?" "The dearest of friends," Charles agreed. As they walked back to the visitor center, Charles felt something shift inside him. The mystery was solved. But more than that. A circle had been closed. The love they had shared in youth had transformed into something different but no less valuable. A connection that had survived 50 years of separation. Changed, but not diminished by time, they parted with promises to meet again. To share their conservation work. To be present in each other's lives in whatever way was appropriate. As Charles's car pulled away, he looked back to see Eloise standing in the doorway, her hand raised in farewell. He thought of Camilla, waiting at home, and felt no guilt, only gratitude. Life had given him different loves at different times, each one teaching him something essential. The boy who had loved Eloise had helped shape the man who could love Camilla. And now, in the autumn of his years, he had regained not a lost love, but a found friend. Proof that some connections transcend time and circumstance. The letter that had arrived addressed to "My Love" had brought him full circle, reminding him that the heart's capacity for connection was infinite, that love took many forms, and that sometimes the greatest gift was simply to remember and be remembered in return. As the Cornish countryside rolled past his window, Charles smiled, feeling more complete than he had in years. Some mysteries, he realized, were meant to be solved not to reclaim the past but to enrich the present.